My name is Alexis Burbank, and I'm an artist and illustrator living here in the Waterville area. My friends at Common Street Arts asked if I could share with you today a little bit about their latest Art Kits for All packet. And it looks like we are going to be exploring watercolor painting. Now, as an artist, I like to use all kinds of different mediums to create my art, from acrylic paints to pen and pencils, but watercolor is one of my favorites. As you can see, I love to draw and paint animals and nature, and watercolors are just so beautiful and vibrant and really fun to work with. So today we're going to be learning about some different techniques on how to use watercolors. But first, let's see what we have in this packet. Well, it looks like the first thing we're going to find is our instructions. It's going to be talking about a few different techniques. Looks like there's 3 pieces of watercolor paper, a pencil and brush, some sea salt, and some plastic wrap. Got the watercolors themselves, 3 crayons, and it looks like we have an artist postcard that you can draw on the side and write your address and a little note, and you can send it to someone that you care about, or it looks like you can even send it to Common Street Arts. I know that they would love to see some of the artwork that you are creating. Now, another thing I want to mention that you're going to want for this project is you're going to want a glass of water that you can dip your paintbrush into, as well as some paper towels. That's very important when you're using watercolor. So let's take a look and try out some of these techniques. All right, let's get started. So to set up, I have my clean water, my watercolors, my paintbrushes, and a clean paper towel. Now, before you get started, you want to look at your watercolor paper. You will notice that both sides are a little bit different. One side has a rough texture and the other side has a smooth texture. Usually when we are painting with watercolor paper, we want to use the side that has a rough texture. You can see here that I already pre-sketched a sea turtle to paint. I usually like to sketch out what I'm going to paint first, but you don't have to. In fact, I recommend that you try some of your paper and just experiment with different things first, some of the different techniques that are mentioned in the instructions. Now, to get started, you want to waken up your watercolor paints. And to do this, you're going to dip your paintbrush in your water, and you are just going to drop a little bit of water onto your paint palette. And what this does is that it acts with the watercolors to make it paint. Now, an important thing to know is that to make your colors darker, you want to use less water. So say you just dip it in once. You dip it in your color and you apply it on. See how dark that is? Now, if you want to make your watercolors lighter, you are going to add more water. So I just dipped my paintbrush and mixed it in with some of that paint that I had on my palette. See how much lighter that is? So you can play around with making your paint a little bit darker, a little bit lighter. You can even add more water onto it once you paint on the paint paper. See? Now, when I am painting with watercolors, I usually like to put on the lightest colors first, and then go back over it and add darker colors. because it's a lot easier to add colors than it is to take away colors. Now here you can see that I've already started painting my sea turtle. I've started with some lighter colors so that I can layer on some darker colors later. Now you'll probably notice that these aren't the colors that sea turtles usually are, but I encourage you to experiment and just have fun with your colors. Next, I'm gonna try one of the techniques that is in our directions, and that is the plastic wrap technique. Now I've actually never done this, so let's give it a try. So I would like to give the turtle shell a little bit more texture. So I'm actually going to do something a little bit different with my plastic wrap. I am going to cut it up into smaller pieces and use it on the individual parts of the shell. See what happens. Okay, so now you can see I cut up my plastic wrap into smaller pieces. And next what I'm going to do is I am going to add some darker colors to the turtle's shell and then layer those pieces of plastic wrap on them. See what kind of effect it gives us. So here you can see I added some darker blue to the turtle's shell, and then I layered it with the plastic wrap. So now we're gonna wait for it to dry and see what happens. All right, so now that I've left it for a few minutes, it should dry pretty fast. I'm gonna take off my plastic wrap and see what happened. So you can see there was a bit of an effect where the plastic wrap had crinkled, that it left some different stripes and things in my shell and giving it a lot more texture. You can do this technique with other things like bubble wrap or a paper towel. I would definitely suggest, if you're just kind of experimenting, to try putting on a whole big piece to use as like a background or something. Gives it a really cool tie-dye effect. So next, let's try some of the wet on wet technique. So what you want to do is you want to take your brush. I've got a fairly large brush. I'm going to dip it in my water. And I'm going to spread it on my paper. Here I'm going to use it as the background of the water. So I'm going to spread it around the edges. So next what you're going to do is you're going to take some of your paint with a wet brush with some of your paint on it. You are going to start painting. So if you can see the wet on wet technique, what's happening is that the pigments in the paint are getting drawn in by that water, creating kind of a tie-dye effect. This is a great technique for painting skies, if you want to make a sunset. There are all kinds of cool things that you can do with this. And you can keep blending it. Using the wet on wet technique, usually the paint will only spread as far as you put your water. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get the edges of the painting a lot darker if I can, because the next thing we're going to do is we're going to try that salt technique that they talk about in our packet instructions. Now, I've used the salt technique before to make kind of a starry sky. It's really cool for using in a background, because what's going to happen is the salt is going to suck up all that pigment that's in the paint and leave these kind of starburst effects. Another thing you can try at home is if you have some rubbing alcohol and a little bit of water in a spray bottle, you can try spritzing that on it. It has a similar effect to the salt technique. All right, so I'm just kind of blending this in a little bit better here. All right. So the salt that came in our packet is pretty big. See, they're kind of big chunks of sea salt. So I'm going to spread a couple on the edges here. Remember, you want your paint to be pretty wet. And I also grabbed some salt that I had that's a little bit finer that I can sprinkle around here. Watercolor is so much fun because there's so many different unique techniques that you can use to give all kinds of interesting effects. It's not only is it art, but it's kind of a science experiment too. So now we just have to wait for it to dry and then we can brush it off. All right, so here you can see the salt dried and I brushed it all away. It took maybe 15 minutes for it to dry completely. And during that time, I had some gold ink, so I decided to play around and just add it to the shell just for fun. It didn't come out exactly how I had planned it in the beginning, but that's okay. Sometimes we just have to try different things and have fun, even if something doesn't come out just the way we want it to. It's good practice. The more we practice, the better we get at something. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video and that you try all kinds of new and different watercolor techniques yourself. If you have something that you made with this kit that you are really proud of, if you want to take a picture of that and send it to Common Street Arts, I'm sure they would love to see some of the things that you're creating. Until then, keep practicing and have lots of fun. Thank you for watching.